it's been yet another whirlwind of a week, even with Congress out on recess. What a week. Vice President Kamala Harris announced Minnesota Governor Tim Walz as her running mate on Tuesday. There's been obviously abundant coverage and scrutiny about that and the various details of his life, his military career, his time in public service, and on and on and on. But as we kind of look at this through the lens of Scripture, what do we need to consider as we comb through it all? And again, specifically from a biblical perspective. Well, joining me now for this discussion is David Closson. He's the director of the Center for Biblical Worldview here at the Family Research Council. David, it's always an honor to have you. Thanks for joining me today.
Great to be with you, Jody.
All right, so let's start. The dust has been flying all week. The whirlwind is all over the place. Let's try to get some of the dust to settle. Let's begin. Let me just get your take on Kamala Harris's choice of Tim Walz to serve as her running mate.
Yeah, Jody, frankly, I was quite surprised. I think in the lead up to the announcement earlier this week, all indicators were that she would go with Josh Shapiro, who's the very popular governor of Pennsylvania. And I think when you're trying to figure out how to get to 270 electoral votes, most of those maps require Pennsylvania. It's kind of the ultimate swing state. So it seemed like a politically savvy choice. But going with Tim Walz, and it's interesting, Jody, to see the coverage, kind of glowing coverage of this, this folksy, hometown, happy warrior kind of guy. But when you actually look at his record as both a governor and congressman, he's actually incredibly liberal. I'll just start our conversation off with this, Jody. I went back actually into the archives, the FRC Action archives, going back to 2007 when he was a congressman. And the high water mark for then Congressman Walz, as far as voting with FRC, we put out a scorecard every year on issues related to family, religious freedom, sexuality, abortion. He voted with us 11% of the time from 2007 to 2008. That was the high water mark. For the next 8 years, he got a big goose egg. 0% of the time he voted with FRC Action. And actually, his final term in Congress, which would have been the 115th Congress, Jody, he voted with us once. And what's actually incredible about that is it was a mistake. And I wish I could tell you his incompetence in voting the wrong way was his worst trait, but he actually accidentally voted for the Born Alive Survivor Protection Act, legislation that would provide protections for babies who survive botched abortions. He accidentally voted for it, and the next day publicly apologized for it and filed something in the congressional record saying that if he could do it over again, he'd actually vote against that bill. So again, he's actually incredibly liberal, Jody.
Yeah, that's quite an understatement. You mentioned specifically his position, his stance on abortion, and quite frankly, this has not received a whole lot of reporting, but he was one of the first governors, if I'm not mistaken, to sign an expansive abortion bill after Roe v. Wade was overturned. What does this law that he signed reveal about not just abortion, but his worldview?
Yeah, and again, that's so important to look at someone's record and to compare it to Scripture. The issue of abortion, the dignity of human life, this is not an issue where there's two sides from a Christian perspective. God has spoken on this issue. Every person, born and unborn, has inherent value and dignity. This is why this is such a pressing concern for Christians. And Jody, I kind of went into the archive to see how now governor, but then Congressman Walz voted on this issue. And again, it shows that he's one of the most energetic supporters of abortion that we've seen in recent memory. I just pulled up the record. Going back to 2011, he voted twice to continue funding for Planned Parenthood. In 2012, he voted against a ban against sex-selective abortion. In 2013, 15, and 17, he voted against the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act, legislation that says when a baby in the womb can feel pain, that abortion should be illegal. He voted against that 3 times. And then again, in 2018, voting against the Born Alive Survivor Protection Act. But what you just referenced, Jody, so important. Minnesota, under his leadership, was the first state after Roe v. Wade was overturned by the Supreme Court to advance a really, really progressive, liberal abortion law. It was actually the first item that the legislature there in Minnesota pushed through. And Republicans actually tried to water it down to offer some amendments. They were all shot down. And after he signed that legislation, Jody, you can now get a legal abortion through all 9 months of pregnancy in Minnesota. But what's even worse last year, Jody, well, I don't know if you can say it's worse, but it just shows that he's, again, an energetic supporter. He stripped, from 2006 until last year, there was a state level grant that gave money to crisis pregnancy centers. As soon as that was brought to the governor's attention, he made sure that they were stripped of all of that money. And then he also realized that the state had a Born Alive Survivor Protection Act at the state level, and he made sure to weaken that significantly. And so this is regrettable, Jody. I think this is something we should be mourning. But whenever Governor Walz has had an opportunity to weigh in on the abortion issue, he has gone with the most liberal impulses of his party. And I think it's not being reported, so I'm glad we're covering it on Washington Watch. But again, this is one of the most ardent supporters of abortion we've seen on the national stage.
Yeah, and that's all. It seems like it was all that Vice President Harris could talk about for her time as vice president. Everywhere she went, all she could talk about was abortion, abortion, abortion. And now she brings as her vice president running mate someone who might be even more a fanatic on abortion as she is. It's unbelievable. I do want to play a clip for you. It kind of hits, it's in the context of abortion while he was on the campaign trail, but it even goes beyond this. Play clip 2 for me.
We respect our neighbors and their personal choices that they make. Even if we wouldn't make the same choice for ourselves, there's a golden rule. Mind your own business.
Yeah, and that was bleeped out because there was some cursing in there. But basically it's saying the golden rule, just mind your own business. Your response to this line of campaign speech, if we can call it that?
Well, Jody, he doesn't actually believe that. During COVID, this is a governor who imposed an indoor mask mandate. He had some of the most stringent COVID policies anywhere in the country. They rivaled what Gavin Newsom was doing in California. This is also the same governor who promoted a hotline during COVID where he encouraged Minnesotans, if they thought their neighbors were not abiding by COVID protocols, that they could report them to the authorities. And so this idea that he's promoting this golden rule of mind your own business, well, my goodness, again, COVID-19 that's not ancient history. He has a record that we can look at, and he doesn't really believe that. But again, the sacrament of the Democrat Party has become abortion. And one thing I'll add, Jody, when Kamala Harris made history as the first president or vice president to visit an abortion clinic, you know where she did that? She did it in Minnesota. And if you go back and look at that archive footage, guess who was right by her side? Her now running mate.
Wow. Yeah, actually, what you brought up about the whole COVID deal, I actually referred to that just a little while ago. We played that clip early as we were introducing the program, and I made virtually the same comment you made. Here was a guy who says, mind your own business, but he was having Minnesotans snitch on other Minnesotans for not abiding by the mandates. That's unbelievable. All right, let's transition. The governor's stance on LGBTQ type issues. Where does he stand on all this?
Yeah, and again, Jerry, this is an issue that Christians care about because, again, out of love of our neighbor, we believe that the Bible has clear guidance on this. We believe that there's a moral order to the universe. And again, that's one of the reasons Christians have cared so deeply about the order of the family and marriage and sexuality. And what's interesting is Tim Walz once again appears to kind of be ahead of the curve as far as being liberal on this issue. In 1999, when he was then a high school teacher and a coach, He was a faculty member who sponsored what was then known as the Gay Straight Alliance at his school. So again, before this was even really a matter of the headlines or the news, he was really out on out leading the charge on what we now would call kind of the LGBT revolution. As a member of Congress, Jody, I know you have voted multiple times against the Equality Act, legislation that would codify sexual orientation, gender identity at the level of protected class, and actually say that whenever religious liberty comes into conflict with these contested claims of gender identity, that it would trump religious freedom, that exempts itself from the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. He was an original co-sponsor on that legislation. This probably won't surprise folks, but he voted against DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act. He voted against the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And one thing I'll point out from his record as a governor last year, this might be the most problematic thing, Jody, is that he actually signed into law legislation that allows a court in Minnesota to temporarily take custody of a child if that child's parents refuse to provide so-called gender-affirming care. Opponents of this bill, I think, rightfully call it the kidnapping bill. And he, again, energetically signed this into legislation. Again, Jody, this is legislation, laws, policies that we're talking about, but this emanates from a worldview. This emanates from a way of looking at the world. And I think this is emblematic, this legislation, of how he sees the world.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to bring it up too. It has been known as, and I refer to it as, the kidnapping bill. Here's the government kidnapping people's children if the parents don't want their kids to be involved in this transgender mutilating outcome for their lives, that the government can come and kidnap the children away. This is so far outside the mainstream. What does this tell us about his worldview? What does it tell us about the people who surround him, who he listens to? Is there something that we can learn from all of this?
Well, I think so, Jody. And again, it shows kind of, again, the Christian principle of subsidiarity tells us that a parents in a household have the authority over the children and have the responsibility to discipleship and rear them up, that a parent knows what's best for their child. And the fact that Governor Walz and the people around him in Minnesota, not only thought this was a good idea, but put the full weight of a public relations campaign behind it, got it through the legislature there in Minnesota, and then had a public bill ceremony. It shows that their view is that they think they know what's better for children than parents. And they also understand, Jody, that these contested claims of sexual orientation and gender identity, if a child is confused, suffering from gender dysphoria, they think they know a better prescription and a better solution than the parent does, or even really most of the medical community.
Yep, and that's frightening. I mean, government knows better than you know as parents. This is probably time for one more question, but being a former pastor before going to Congress, the media is ignoring this, but one of our Washington Stand reporters, Joshua Arnold, has done some extensive study on the church background of Governor Walz. Can you, in about a minute, fill us in on what his church life is like?
Yeah, no surprising. He goes to a very theologically liberal church. It's called Pilgrim Lutheran. It's part of a theologically liberal denomination that actually on their website talks about how the reason this church separated from the more conservative denomination was because they didn't agree with the concept of inerrancy, the idea that the Bible is without errors. So this church, you can see it on the website. They use feminine pronouns to refer to God when they pray the Lord's Prayer. They have an LGBT alliance, completely affirming the whole, transgender, bisexual, lesbian, gay movement. And so, I'm not surprised seeing the kinds of policies that Governor Walz has pursued. No surprise that he belongs to a theologically liberal denomination that has deviated from 2,000 years of Christian history and biblical interpretation on a whole host of issues.
Wow. David Closson, always great to have you for these Biblical Worldview segments. I appreciate it a great deal. Hope you have a fantastic weekend. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jody. God bless.